Welcome to the second meeting of the Environmental Utilities Commission. I am Dan Mount, Public Works Operation Manager for the City of West Sacramento. As with all public events, please join the Commission in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Chair Vilhauer and Vice Chair Rasmus are not present tonight, but we do have two new commissioners with us tonight.
And I need to conduct the oath of allegiance for Lori, Commissioner Lackey. Let's see. If you could raise your right hand, and I guess you can sit down.
Sit down. Okay. Okay.
And speak into the mic.
Okay.
I, Lori Lackey,
I, Lori Lackey,
do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution,
do solemnly, repeat that. Solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution
that I will support and defend the Constitution
of the United States
of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California
and the Constitution of the State of California
against all enemies,
Against
foreign,
against all enemies, foreign
and domestic,
and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
to the Constitution of the United States
to the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California,
and to the Constitution of the State of California,
that I will take this obligation freely
that I will take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
without any mental reservation of purpose or evasion,
and that I will well and faithfully discharge
and that I will well and faithfully discharge
the duties upon which I am about to enter.
the duties upon which I'm about to enter.
Welcome, Commissioner Lackey. If you can tell a little bit about yourself so the public knows, that would be great.
Yeah, definitely. So I've been a citizen here in West Sacramento for just almost exactly 10 years. We've been in the Bridgeway Lakes area. I have approximately 4 or 5 kids. We've had foster kids throughout the last 10 years. So through those years, we've had lots of kids in the school district and in the city. And I'm also a local business owner. We have a mortgage company here also.
Thank you.
Due to a lack of a chair and a vice chair tonight, we only need a volunteer to chair the meeting. Thank you. At that point, I'll turn it over to the chair for item 1C.
There are no presentations. Her mic, is your mic on? Little green button.
There we go.
Okay.
That should work better. So there were no presentations from the public on matters that were not on the agenda, which was item 1C. For item 1D, are there any commission communications at this point? All right, with that, we'll move on to item number 2, which is consideration of the approval of the minutes from our last meeting on April 13th. If there are no amendments that are needed to the agenda, then we'll need a motion to approve.
I move to approve the minutes.
Excellent. Do we have a second? All right, all in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. All right, so moving on to our regular agenda, item number 3 is a consideration of a presentation regarding the city's process for the installation of missing and non-compliant backflow devices on applicable water services. And I believe that we have a presentation associated with that.
We do.
Excellent.
Yes. And good evening, commission members. I am Wendy Williams, Senior Civil Engineer with the Community Development Department. The staff report before you explains the city's proposed program for the installation of backflow devices on applicable commercial and multifamily water services due to non-compliant or non-existent backflow devices. The city is responsible to protect the public drinking water supply from contamination through a cross-connection control program. One potential form of contamination is the possible flow of water back into the city system during a sudden drop in pressure such as a water main break. Backflow prevention devices guard against this contamination by allowing water to only flow one way through the device. These devices are typically installed at or near the point of connection of the water service to the water main. The type of service is determined based on the degree of hazard of the water service, but in general, commercial and multifamily water services are required to have backflow devices. Single-family water services typically only require a backflow device if an active well also exists on the property. Applicable water services would include domestic, irrigation, and fire services. City staff has estimated that 325 water services will need retrofit under this program, although we are still in the process of compiling the full list. Domestic and irrigation devices are very similar and typically range in size between a 3/4 inch up to 4 inches, while fire service device installations would typically range from about 6 inches up to 12 inches. The cost to the property owner to install a backflow device on a water service will vary greatly depending on a number of factors, including the size of the device, the type of the device, and design and construction costs, taking into account any obstructions that may need removed or relocated based on the location of the future device. Given the smaller size than the lesser purchase cost, domestic and irrigation devices may cost between $700 to a few $1,000s, whereas fire device installations may run into the tens of thousands of dollars. In addition to the significant increase in purchase price for the larger devices, a new backflow device on an existing fire service could adversely affect that fire system, and therefore a building permit for fire review will be required to ensure that the existing fire system will still work properly after the installation of the fire device. In order to defray costs to the property owners, staff intends to discuss fee waivers with City Council, and we are still investigating other low-interest rate loan options for a program. Our proposed program includes notification letters to the affected property owners, giving them a certain amount of time to obtain the permit and then time to complete the work depending on the type of service. So for domestic and irrigation services, we propose allowing a 3-month period to obtain the permit and another 3-month period to construct the, install the device, whereas we suggest 6 months to obtain permits and 6 months to complete the process for fire devices. Groups of letters would go out in batches, separated by a few months, to allow staff to keep up with the inquiries and the permit plan check and inspection. Mailing groups would likely be based on degree of hazard, and then secondarily grouped geographically. Staff proposes to host at least 2 informational meetings for property owners to ask questions of staff. We will likely record one of those meetings and post it on the website along with a list of FAQs for property owners who cannot attend one of the meetings. And then depending on property owner response, additional meetings may be scheduled. So I've also been in contact with the Chamber of Commerce, and we will be presenting to their group in November to obtain their feedback on this proposed program. It has also come to our attention during this process that most of the state's responsibilities for drinking water recently transferred from the Department of Public Health to State Water Resources Board. And so staff will be updating the city's municipal code to incorporate those changes as this program moves forward to City Council for approval. A more detailed explanation of the background and analysis is available in the staff report, but I'd be happy to answer any questions or receive any comments that you might have on the program.
Excellent. Thank you for your presentation. Are there any questions or comments on this program?
I had a question regarding the permit fee waiver. I was wondering if maybe you could go into a little detail of what the various fees are that are associated with these backflow devices. I noticed that there was a mention of a small monthly fee in the report. Is that the same thing as the permit fee, or is that in addition to the permit fee?
The fee that's mentioned in the staff report is in addition to the permit fee. The monthly fee that's mentioned it's a monthly fee to help defray the cost of the yearly inspection that happens on that backflow device after it's installed.
And
So
so,
there's-
I'm sorry,
that-
the proposed permit fee waiver then would just be for the permit fee itself, but not for the monthly fee?
Correct. It would be to defray the cost to the customer of the city staff time for plan check and inspection of the permits for installation only.
And is there a difference in the permit fee for the residential backflow devices versus the fire system backflow devices?
Absolutely. The permit fees are normally based on the value of the work. So obviously, the larger the size of the device, the larger the value of the work, the more the plan check and inspection fees are, up to approximately 10% of the value of the work.
Thank you.
I had a couple of questions on the timeline that's proposed to address these systems. How long have some of these entities been non-compliant with their backflow devices?
Some of these properties have been non-compliant for many, many years.
Okay.
Many of them probably never had a backflow device on their system since they were constructed.
And do you feel that the proposed schedule adequately addresses the risks of not having the backflow devices? Because I look at this as 6 months at the earliest for a new backflow device to be installed or retrofitted, as the case may be. And then when we have batches of letters going out over many months, do you have a timeline for when you anticipate all of these locations would be fully up to code?
We don't currently have a full timeline of how long it might take us to finish this program, partially because we don't have the full compiled list either. And we don't know at this point how many of the devices are fire devices versus domestic or irrigation devices. So obviously, the fire devices take a lot more work, and because mainly they have to be checked to make sure that when they go on the existing fire system, that the fire system will now still work. So there is a difference between those two timelines, and we haven't figured out how long it will take us.
Do you have a goal for when you would like these to be complete within, say, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, knowing that there's still a lot of
Right. I
additional-
think we're looking more on the 2 to 3 year timeline.
For the 325 or so currently known backflow devices that are either non-compliant or non-existent, is there a penalty for these commercial businesses or multi-residential facilities for not having a backflow device?
Not currently. That's the other reason why we need to get them on. Really, if something really happened and the city's main lost pressure and we sucked some objectionable or contaminated water back into the city system, I don't know if there's a way to go back to the property owner. We'd have to figure out that it was a particular property owner first. But I'm not sure that there's really a way to go back to that property owner if there are any penalties or not. That also highlights the reason why we need to get this project started and moving along.
Right, and I fully agree with sort of the potential for a public health concern if something was to go wrong and the backflow device wasn't there. But it was just, it sounds like there's at least some entities out there that despite not having a backflow device for years, continue to not have one. And even if we were to do this notification and permitting process, there's the potential that some entities might not comply. And if that's the case, I was wondering, is there any thought for perhaps implementing a penalty of sorts to help bring them along?
What we would do with this program is turn over the non-compliant ones to code enforcement. And then it would be enforced through the code enforcement program, and code enforcement does have penalties and administrative citations that they can impose in order to move things along.
Excellent, thank you.
Has there ever been a water main break or anything that would have put the system at risk?
Dan?
Well, I've been here 15 years in charge of the water system, so to my knowledge, no. We had a few that I can think of very close calls, where if there was not a backflow device installed properly, we would have had a big issue. The backflow device did stop the contamination.
What is the current age of our drinking water infrastructure?
The current age of what, I'm sorry?
Of our drinking water infrastructure?
Of the drinking water infrastructure. We have some very, very old pipes out there.
Okay.
A lot of the city was, a lot of those pipes were installed before the city even became a city, or, there are portions of the city that are very old from the early 1900s. Now, we've gone through and updated and replaced a lot of those pipes, but we're still doing that process.
Okay. But there is a plan in place to start to repair and replace the older pipe
There is always a
sections.
plan in place. There's always a list.
Is there action on the plan?
Yes, there is always a list of ones to fix and upgrade, so yes.
Are these non-compliant properties regionalized? Are they mostly in the northern portions of the city, or is it kind of spread out throughout the city?
It is spread out there. I would say there are more in the northern area only because, one, there's more parcels in the north area, and two, the north area is older. And so a lot of these, especially the ones that do not have a backflow device, were properties that the city inherited when they became a city. So that's how they were constructed.
I have one final question. How are you going to assess the degree of hazard in prioritizing these?
The degree of hazard is based on a number of factors. It can be that there's a 24-hour gate there. We don't have as much access to the property. We know that they use, say, an injection system of chemicals into their water supply for some manufacturing purpose. Those kinds of things that we look at on an individual parcel basis to figure out their degree of hazard.
And are there very many properties that actually have both wells and domestic service? I can't imagine there are too many, are there?
There are some residential properties, especially in Southport, that had an initial well, and then the water main came along, they decided to connect to domestic water, but they also wanted to keep their well for, say, irrigation. Yeah, and so those do have backflow devices on their water service.
Okay. I'm on a well, and I wish I had both.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions or comments on this item? Thank you very much.
You're
For your
welcome.
presentation. All right, I believe with that, we'll move on to item number 4, which is a consideration of a presentation by the R3 Consulting Group with their analysis of the city's waste hauling services contract. And before that presentation starts, I want to address a potential perceived conflict of interest, given that I work for CalRecycle, which is the state agency that oversees waste and recycling in the state. My particular role at CalRecycle is entirely at statewide policy, so I am not involved at all with grants, loans, jurisdictional compliance, or any other activity that directly affects the work of local governments. And after confirming this with our legal counsel, that there is no financial direct or indirect conflict of interest here. So I just wanted to state that for a record. before we got started. So as long as there's no objection, be happy to hear your presentation.
Hi, good evening, Commissioners. My name is Paulina Benner. I'm the Environmental Services Manager here at the City of West Sacramento. Tonight you'll hear a presentation from Richard Tagore Irwin with R3 Consulting Group to provide some information about their analysis of our current contract and information about how we arrived to our current recommendation, which is to begin some limited-term negotiations with Waste Management. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Richard. But really quickly, I just wanted to mention, too, what we're asking of the Commissioners, any feedback on our proposed recommendation and Richard's presentation this evening. So, thanks.
Good evening, and just for the record, R3 Consulting and myself only work for public agencies. We do not work for any private solid waste service providers, landfill operators, or facility owners or developers. We always like to kind of get that out there very early on. And who has a clicker? We have maybe a 10-minute presentation at the most. If you want to ask questions as we go through this, that's fine. If you want to hold it to the very end, that's also fine. Okay. How about next? A little bit of background. The city has an exclusive agreement with Waste Management for all of its solid waste services, including residential, commercial recycling, green waste, and trash. Your current landfill, it goes over to the Yolo County landfill for disposal, as well as the composting. The contract was in place when the city formed, so it's been kind of a continuation of services from prior to the city forming. So it's a continuation of the old county contract that's gone on. Your franchise agreement with Waste Management, you've had several amendments to that to sort of update it. The city brought us in March to take a look at your current contract and what are your options? Options being, should you negotiate? Should you go through a competitive bid process? Part of that is to take a look at market conditions. Who are the other haulers? What are the rates? What are the services that other communities in the Sacramento metro market area have? And that has a lot to do with where our recommendation is. Okay, there we go. Again, Waste Management provides your residential, commercial, weekly garbage, weekly recycling, and weekly yard waste. And that's a service that's pretty much standard throughout this area. Some cities across the river, Citrus Heights, Rancho Cordova, they have every other week green waste and recycling, so it's an alternating system, but you have it weekly. They also provide services for all your city buildings and facilities, citywide cleanup, oil, compact fluorescence, holiday tree service, public awareness, a little limited public awareness educational grant programs. That's sort of their book of business they provide. What the city does is the city provides for the billing and customer service and sets the rates charged to the customers. And this is a really important distinction as we kind of go through this. The city has a specific contract with Waste Management, and they pay Waste Management directly. That contract has its own annual escalators. And so that contract, what they pay Waste Management, is tucked into your customer rate base. The city sets the rates that you actually charge the customers and collect the money. And what's occurred over the last several years is because the city has not kept pace with inflation and the contract size, what you actually charge your customers does not cover the cost of what you pay Waste Management for the services. So there's an imbalance there. You've had a reserve account, and it's pulled out of the reserves to balance the refuse fund. So for 2015, fiscal year 2015, the closing deficit was about $310,000. In 2014, it was $530,000. So the deficit has come down, but that's primarily because you've had two 5% rate increases the last 2 years. And there is no rate increase scheduled after this current one goes into place. So you'll have to look at some type of additional rate increase or cost decrease, and it's you can't decrease the cost of services that you provide your contract service providers. So they have to come out of the city, and there's really nothing that you can cut. So option is got to raise the rates or continue running a deficit. In terms of the market conditions, the good part about all the deficit is you have some of the most favorable rates to the customers in the area by far. Your primary customers are either on a 32-gallon or 64-gallon weekly collection, and as you can see, the average in the community or the surrounding area is about $22 and change for 32. You're at $16.73. It's a significantly lower rate. That's a really good rate. The 64-gallon rates, it's very similar. It's about a $6 per month less than the average rates. In the 96, it's a little closer, but it's still about $6. So the majority of your customers are 32 and 64-gallon customer rates, and you really should be really happy about what the city has done to control that basis. So you have a very good rate package that you provide your residents. It's going to have to increase over time just to keep even. The commercial rates is very similar. As a matter of fact, the commercial rates, some of them, you're looking at half the cost of some of the other commercial customers, and for your 2 cubic yard bins collected weekly, 3 cubic yard bins also pretty close to half what the surrounding community rates are paid. You have a bundled commercial recycling as part of that, where many of the communities in the surrounding area don't have a commercial recycling rate that's part of the base services. It's an additional cost. So when you look at your residential rates,
I just wanted to ask how many businesses use the 2 or 3 cubic yard per week services?
I don't have an exact number, but the majority of our businesses in front load containers are probably around the 3-4 cubic yard. I don't have an exact percentage. So it's probably a good portion of them are in the lower sizes.
And then do these similar trends apply for the larger units or more frequent pickups?
Well, so our commercial rates are per cubic yard rate.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so regardless of how often it's picked up, it's, it's X number of dollars per cubic yard. So whatever combination you have, that's the rate you pay. It doesn't matter if it's, 2 yard twice a week or 4 yard once a week, it's the same number.
and then that's pretty much the same it is in the region, is it's just all multiples of the same base number. So if you've got a favorable rate within a 3-yarder, you're going to have a favorable rate within a 4-yarder, and so on.
Okay, thank you.
In terms of, again, the market conditions, your rates that you charge your customers are very favorable, but there's a couple things that really have to play into that. One, most other franchise services, the hauler provides the billing. They do the billing, customer service directly. That also means that if they don't get paid, they don't get paid. The way this contract is set up is if the city doesn't get paid, you still pay them. So there's a cash flow part of this that the city all sets aside a budget. Ultimately, the city does collect that money because you can put it on the tax rolls and it just comes in later. But ultimately, you do get your money, but you pay waste management first and then you collect it second. Most of the franchise services, the hauler provides the service, they provide the billing, they collect the money, and they pay the city the franchise fees from there. Yours is a little bit different system. Some of the other cities that have higher rates, they have a bundled cost for street sweeping that's buried into that rate. Yours is not. That's paid out of the general fund, I believe, but it's not part of your refuse rates. Some of the cities are moving towards residential food waste. That's not here yet. It's something that's probably in the horizon, as you probably well know. Same as the commercial food waste. That's going to hit January 1st of this year. The city has to have a plan to begin commercial multifamily organics collection services. It starts at an 8 cubic yards generation factor, and then it tiers down from there over the next several years. That's a program that the city is going to have to implement. It's not optional. Additional pieces that we're looking at is some of the other cities have on-call bulky waste, e-waste, electronic waste, and e-waste, where the resident can actually call up and schedule the service. What we found, it's a very, very popular program, and it has a huge impact in reducing your illegal dumping. Because you're going to get it anyway. It's either going to show up on a scheduled basis and you're going to have it, or it's going to show up and you're going to call up and have it picked up illegally. And then some of the schools have a fairly strong public education outreach program. What is in your franchise services, it's there, but it's not as strong as some of the other communities. So those are all factors that really do play into the rate base. When you look at fees paid to the city, the fee that you collect from your hauler through retention is 9.2% of their gross revenue. The average is 10 to 15% for the communities around here. So you have a little lower franchise fee. And other cities have other fees paid to them from the hauler, whether it's a vehicle impact fee, a road impact fee, environmental mitigation fee. So there's other sorts of fees that get paid back in to the city to administer those programs. Well, I'll go back. What that really means is there is no free services. All of it will end up being in your rate base. You may ask for a new service. It's going to get reflected in your rates. When we looked at sort of the pros and the cons of negotiation versus competitive bid, sort of the negotiation pros, it takes less time generally to negotiate a contract. It's usually a lower cost to the city to negotiate. If you're negotiating, you're not going to be having a transition. And I don't know if you've ever lived in another city that has changed its hauler. It's not fun. Even though all the haulers that are in the area, whether it's Waste Management, Republic, California Waste Removal, they've all gone through transitions. There's always hiccups. There's always going to be calls. There's always going to be pieces that get left out. So just that's something you need to be aware of going forward, that there's always going to be a transition issues if you change haulers. And even if you negotiate, and that is what we're recommending, you don't preclude the city opting to go out to competitive bid if negotiations are not going to lead you where you want to go. Again, on some of the negatives of negotiations, you're really negotiating with one company. That may not be the best deal you can get. It may be the best deal you can get, but it may not be. There's not a whole lot of pressure to reduce your rates. You've already got some of the lowest rates in the area. It's pretty hard to reduce already some of the lowest ones around. The other thing is that typically what we find, and I'm not saying that Waste Management is going to do this, but you have a set franchise term. It's going to expire. The longer those negotiations drag out, it puts the pressure on the city to either extend the current contract or not go out to competitive bid. So you have to put parameters on the negotiation time frame to keep yourself in control of the situation. And a couple other issues is on a negotiation basis, it is a negotiated contract, so the terms and conditions are all negotiated, as opposed to a competitive one. You issue the contract and they are really required to sign it as you want it 100%. So you have to give up a little bit of negotiation process. The last one is probably important for this group is perception. Is there any perception that this is just a good old boy deal? I think in this particular case it's not, but that can be raised. In terms of some of the pros for competitive, increased competition. If you have 3 or 4 vendors that are looking for your $60+ million contract, that's a pretty good competitive process to go through, and they're going to be looking at hard programs and rates to keep it very competitive. It provides the city a lot more flexibility on adding programs because you're going to get market-based rates for them. The city controls the time frame in the process. You're in control. Negotiation, you're in partial control, but ultimately you've got one partner you have to work with. And what we looked at is there's really 4 haulers in the area that would probably come in and try to propose on this project if you went out to competitive bid. No guarantees, though. That's something you have to understand. You could go out to competitive bid and you may not like the results. No guarantee. Again, the cons, it takes more time. It's typically a 12+ month process to go through a competitive proposal process. It's going to cost you more money. Generally, the winning hauler is required to reimburse the city for the cost. Again, it'd be nice to say they just take that out of their bottom line, but they're going to build it in their rate base. If you change service providers, you're going to have to deal with the transition issues. So that's just something to tuck away. It can be mitigated, but it's there. And you have a new hauler. If you have a new hauler, you don't have the experience with them. You don't have the history with them. Paulina's going to have to learn all over again how to communicate with them. And that is something you really need to have in the back of your mind. You're starting over again on many, many areas. In terms of the options, again, negotiate with the current hauler. Developing a new franchise agreement is got to be part of that. Is you wouldn't take the current agreement and do a term extension. You're going to throw out that agreement and start over again with a new, modern, best practices, green contract. Competitive procurement process. First, you have an RFP, which lays out the services that you want, the time frame, the requirements, the evaluation criteria. You go ahead and go through that process, that selection, you get your new hauler, and then you negotiate the final franchise agreement. So it's a longer, more complicated process. And what we're actually suggesting is a little bit of a hybrid. First, negotiate with Waste Management. Our understanding, there's not been a lot of complaints. Everybody's relatively happy with them. You've got a pretty favorable customer rate base. Negotiate with them. If you can work something that really is advantageous to the city and its ratepayers, that's a pretty good option to follow. And in this process, since we started back in March, we actually had the majority of this piece done in April, and then we were kind of directed to talk to Waste Management a little bit, and we did. And they've kind of laid out a framework that frankly looks workable. You know, a 10-year term, new services, you know, a AB 939 fee paid to the city to pay for the city's cost of managing in its programs, a road impact fee, which is important that many communities are doing because the garbage trucks are heavy and they stop at the same spot on residential streets 3 times a week, and they do a lot of damage to the streets over time. So there's a road impact fee that's been discussed. Performance reviews, basically to go back and in essence conduct a top to bottom performance review of Waste Management's operations every 5 years or prior to any extensions to make sure how they're doing. Are they complying with all the terms and conditions? Are they doing a really good job? Some really critical things, the 50% minimum franchise diversion, and that's different from the cow recycle diversion. And what, in order to really keep your hauler accountable, we like to set a franchised hauler diversion, which is every ton of what they collect their franchise services, they have to divert from landfill 50% of it. Okay? It's a pretty hard number to hit. Waste Management is committed to doing that, and that will go a long, long ways towards the city remaining in compliance with any cow recycle changes over the term of the contract. For example, right now, the state has a policy goal of a 75% reduction by 2020. That's at a statewide level. It doesn't apply to West Sacramento yet. That may. And if you look at the numbers, if your hauler is doing 50%, that's going to be pretty darn close to meeting a 75% statewide goal if that trickles down to the city. And that's what we've set this up to get it pretty close. Sustainability coordinator, a half-time sustainability coordinator dedicated to West Sacramento to help with all the program development. Commercial and residential food waste programs. Commercial would be a source separated program. The residential food waste, the way that works is that you as residents, you put your food waste in with your green waste container, and then it's processed at a compost facility from there. Okay. Additional programs to keep the city in full compliance with AB 341, which is commercial recycling, 1594, which is in 2020 the city's green waste. If it's not taken to a compost facility, the city won't get credit for diversion. It's got to be composted. So that's another change that's coming a couple of years down the road, but we have time. And then 1826, which is a commercial organics recycling. So all that's all being slated. So the city's in a really good position to address all these pretty significant legislative changes going forward. On-call collection for U-waste, household hazardous waste, sharps. Same thing for residential and multifamily, so they both have access to that program, and bulky waste. It's a great program. I think you're going to find your residents would love it. It's a great program. Continuing with compact fluorescent collection, expand the education grant program, as well as providing recycling services to special events. Some of the key findings with all that in mind is your current agreement is very cost effective, but it's probably not going to last another 10 years. The required services really are getting out of sync with what you need to do, so you're going to have to make changes. The same thing with the franchise agreement. It's not designed and set up really to give you flexibility to comply with all the new legislative changes in the future that you actually have to comply with now. Customer rates are great. They're really below the market area. You're really, really good. But the problem is you're not collecting enough money off those customer rates to pay for the full services that you're getting. So the city is pulling that out of its reserves and or general fund.
Not general fund, franchise.
The franchise fees. And so what you need to do is you need to develop the program to meet all the state requirements, any other city policy goals, and to be fiscally solvent for the city going forward. That can be done either through negotiations or through an RFP process, but you need to make some changes. And I think kind of one of the final ones is regardless of what the city opts to do, whether they go out to competitive bid or negotiate with Waste Management, you're going to have to develop a new franchise agreement to encapsulate all those new changes and performance requirements. What we're recommending is to set aside about a 3-month period to negotiate with Waste Management to develop a new franchise agreement with all the terms and conditions that we kind of talked about, a contractual document. And if negotiations are not satisfactory, then go ahead and go through a competitive process. Okay, we put together a schedule. It's an aggressive schedule. We all like working through the holidays, but that's kind of how this one works. Basically, depending upon what the city council decides later in the month, you start that 3-month clock at that point. If they direct to negotiations, you'd really need to get something back to council. In essence, a finalized franchise agreement that Waste Management could sign on or around January 20th. You get much beyond that, you're going to run out of time if it doesn't go well and you have to go out to competitive proposal process. Competitive proposal process, again, January, February is when you need to start that process of next year if you don't have an agreement with Waste Management in place. Issue it in the RFP in March, late March, February, March. Proposals would have to be due in May. It's a very fast turnaround time. Late June, you got to provide results back to City Council and finalize that agreement, negotiate it out in July with an August approval. Gives you 6 months to do transition. And the 6 months is a minimum. That's a minimum. Okay, you could do it quicker. I wouldn't recommend it. If you can push it out a little longer, it's a little bit better. With that tight time frame, it doesn't provide a lot of wiggle room. And you really have to be on task, on time, all the way throughout that process.
Is there a way that the RFP could be prepared concurrently with the talks with Waste
It could be,
Management?
yes. The downside of that is you're going to incur costs that you may not need to.
Sure.
That's the downside of it. The other option that you may want to consider is your current agreement does allow, with mutual agreement between the city and Waste Management, some short-term extensions. So you may want to say, if we're going to negotiate for 3 months, we're going to want you, Waste Management, to sign potentially a 3-month or 6 months extension, just to give you a little bit more wiggle room. Okay.
Now, if we do end up going into the RFP process and we don't meet the deadline, what happens then?
You don't have a choice. If you don't extend the contract and you don't have a new vendor in place with new services starting January 1st, 2017, you have no service provider. So January 1st, 2017, the contract expires, the current contract expires. So you can't run up to that window, and we'd make sure that wouldn't happen. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions or comments or suggestions?
Is that the conclusion of your presentation?
Yes, I'm sorry, it is.
Thank you. So,
Yeah, I have a
question?
question. Yeah, so you're mentioning the reserve that I guess is a percentage that goes back to the city? Is that correct?
The franchise.
Sorry, the franchise fees?
The franchise fees.
Okay,
yeah.
so the negative amount that we're incurring right now, you were saying is pulled from a reserve, but is it actually kind of a wash because of those franchise fees?
No, it's actually coming out of the refuse fund reserve.
Okay.
So you've been drawing it down every year for the last several years.
And then
So
just-
in effect, we're not getting a franchise fee right now because we're net paying out money.
You could certainly argue that, yes.
And we're still in negative, probably, yeah. One other question. I know in several surrounding areas now, they're no longer doing separate recycle cans. Is that something, do you know what I'm referring to?
Yeah, yeah.
And is that an extra cost? Is it?
It's, I live in Placer County. We
Yes,
have
Placer County.
one big barrel, and I've gotten used to it.
Mhm.
And from a recycling standpoint, it's not as effective.
Okay.
It's just not.
Okay.
Because everything is called dirty MRF. Everything runs through the MRF, and they're going to get 22, 23% recovery out of it. It's not very much.
Okay, I
And
heard a
your
report that's
recovery-
actually more effective, but I guess that's not.
No.
No,
It
okay.
it is if you're processing, dirty commercial, and you can't get your commercial businesses to participate, then it can be effective. But for residential, that's the program you have now. Everybody's used to it. It's working well. I wouldn't change it.
Okay.
And especially for more densely populated areas, it is a lot easier to do separate recycling and trash because you don't have to send one truck many miles to pick up
Yeah.
from different residences or locations. So.
Okay, thank you.
Now, one of the questions I had is, we talked about the city providing the billing versus the hauler providing the billing. Is there a lot of cost that the city isn't incurring by providing the billing, or?
The city provides the billing for solid waste.
Yeah, we already do
Yeah.
water, sewer, and garbage billing, so the additional cost of billing for refuse services isn't really a cost to do the billing. There's an associated cost for customer service, but it's currently built into our rate structure, so that wouldn't change if we move forward with keeping that in our own customer service side of things.
Is it a burden on the city for the amount of uncollected garbage bills? Is it a huge?
Like Richard mentioned, if people don't pay their bill, their entire bill is actually rolled to the property tax. So we ultimately do receive payment.
Right.
There's just that delay, which is why we have that fund balance that we carry over to make up that difference between when we actually pay out to Waste Management and actually get the bad debt paid back off the tax roll.
How much is in that fund?
It is, I don't know if I have it with me.
The carryover, right now, I believe we have a little over $1 million.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, I don't know
I
what the
think
number
it's
is.
a little bit less than that, I think, with the close of, it's approximately about $1 million at the close of fiscal 2015. I didn't put it in there.
So in order for us to get to at least a net zero cost for managing waste and including all of these additional programs, which I think are certainly needed to modernize the system for the city, what sort of rate increases are we looking at for our services?
Okay. And that's through competitive process or negotiation, because the answer is liable to be different. Okay, I don't know.
Because I presume they would go up.
Pardon me?
I mean, I'm expecting our rates are going to go up in order to include all of these additional services,
Anywhere
at
from
least somewhat.
3 to 10% potentially.
Is there kind of a time frame when we will know exactly how much the rates will be increasing?
It depends upon the direction that the council provides. If they provide direction to negotiate with Waste Management, we'll know in 3 months. If it's a competitive proposal process, it's going to be 6 to 9 months before we actually get those numbers back.
But you think it's reasonable for it to be as low as 3 to 10%?
Well,
for all of the
I think if you go
additions?
through a competitive process, because you have your rates where you're at, any company's going to propose, they're going to recognize that, and it's going to do one of two things. It's either going to make them sharpen their pencils up, or they won't submit. Because they know that if you go through a competitive process and you have a rate base that goes up 10, 15, 20%, it's pretty darn difficult for your council to say, yeah, let's do that. And we're kind of trying to avoid that.
The minimum 50% franchise diversion, as we hit 2020 and it goes up to 75%, how is that? Is there a built-in cost bump at that point in the contract, or is that what you would propose?
That's what we're proposing to mitigate having additional, if the state pushes that requirement down to the local level. If you look at your, you can kind of convert the Cal Recycle numbers around to diversion, and in the 50%, there's a significant new diversion that's going to have to occur to get the franchise hauler to 50%, and that's pretty much the tonnage the city as a whole would need to gain to get to 75% citywide number. So the two of them are working together. And what we're actually suggesting is the franchise diversion is 50% and having the hauler work with the city to do whatever additional programs are necessary to make sure the city's in compliance. If it does, go to 75%. The calculations are different. Okay.
So what is the current franchise diversion?
It's only what the franchise hauler touches, only what they collect. Of the total garbage, organics, and recyclables they collect, they have to divert 50% of that.
Right, so do we have a number for what Waste Management is doing currently?
It's 34, 35%. So they've got, it's a pretty big gap for them to pick up.
Right, and so the proposal then is to take that franchise diversion to 50% and then
Yeah.
potentially also tie that to a citywide goal that's more aligned with the statewide calculations for diversion?
Yes.
To say West Sacramento is going to say 75%, or maybe like what Sacramento just announced of zero waste by 2025 or 2040, or I forget what their exact timeline was. But so there would be some mention of both of those targets.
You'd want to work
within-
at both targets.
Excellent, okay.
But to require the franchise hauler to hit a 75% franchise diversion or Cal Recycle 75% diversion, at this point, I don't think the hauler, any hauler would sign a contract without some pretty significant rate escalator in there, that we don't know what that is.
I notice on page 3 of the report, there's a section that talks about areas in the current agreement that are below industry standards. And one of them is that there's only, quote, free repair or replacement of containers of about 150 a year.
Yeah.
I wasn't able to see in any of the charts a comparison of how that compares to other municipalities in the area. Is that a particularly low number?
It can be. Most other contracts, more, modern contracts, the cart repair replacement is, if it's broken, they replace it. There is no upset limit on it. It's an unlimited number. Where that's mitigated is if you break your cart, you're gonna have to pay for it. If your cart breaks, they pick it up and they replace it. I think the current contract, it had a specific number set aside that they had to replace every year.
So,
And
I'm sorry, when you say, when you break your cart, you pay the repair price, does that mean the residential customer or the city as a whole?
the residential customer.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, that is typically how it's done in most other franchise areas. If the customer damages the cart, they're responsible for the cost of replacing that cart. Yeah.
I know you probably mentioned this, but how long is the new contract that the negotiation would be? Was it 10 years, did you mention?
10 years.
So if bottom line, for instance, it took 20% increase to actually make the city whole, would something like a tier increase be something that was acceptable? So it's not like, to the citizens, here's 20%, but, 3 to 5% over, or something like that over several years?
It's very common if you go out to competitive proposal process and you see these large rate increases, that you sit down and you negotiate, a tiered increase over a couple of years, so you don't have this huge jump.
I see on page 8 of the report, the table 5 that compares franchise fees by city, that our neighboring cities in the county, Winters and Woodland, also have waste management, and they have a 15% franchise fee. Do you know anything about how those cities were able to manage that amount, and whether that's a model that West Sacramento could follow?
Tim and I negotiated a pretty good contract. The city negotiated those contract extensions, and they laid out exactly what they wanted. And they have, they have higher rates though.
Mhm.
So you have to really look at your franchise fees and your customer rates, and your customer rates are on the lower end of the market area. If you want to have a 15% franchise fee, you can get that, but it's not going to be at the same customer rate.
Are those cities, you said there were a couple other cities in the region that have the cities do the building like we do. Are those some of those cities, or do those cities have waste management handle the building?
Waste management handles the billing.
Is the reason that West Sacramento handles the billing just a carryover from this being such an old contract? Or did West Sacramento remove control from the hauler to do the billing themselves at some point?
As far as I know, we've always done the billing for refuse services. I've been with the city for 12 years, and with the contract we have in place and the original 1987 contract, we have always done the billing. I can't really speak to why we originally decided to make that decision, but I think that, the city has a very strong customer service-oriented background, and I think that the idea of us retaining the customer service and the billing kind of goes in line with that. The city likes to be able to have a one-stop shop, so to speak. So I think that's why we've just continued to keep the billing and customer service all along.
But is the intention under this renegotiation to transfer the billing to waste management or whatever?
At this point,
other refuse service if
we would
want that
actually
direction?
maintain the billing.
Okay,
And then with regard to customer service, that's still open to
I see.
how we, figure out that blend.
Okay.
How much is collected annually for that refuse fund that's acting as the buffer right now?
Just for the customer service rates, or just in the total revenues for the fund?
Just the total revenue that goes into that fund?
So fiscal year 14-15, the total revenue for the refuse fund was $6.7 million. So that's our refuse service charges and other revenues. So other revenues would be the franchise fees paid by Waste Management. And then we have other non-exclusive haulers that pay us permit fees. Then we have some other interest penalties and other revenues in that number.
So one provision that I didn't see mentioned in here was commercial green waste pickup. Is that currently included within our services? Is there talk about including that as well, given that AB 1826 will eventually include all organics and not
Correct.
just food waste?
The intent was to include both, and
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that one, I'm sorry.
Go- no, go ahead.
So one of the things that we talked about with organics for commercial services, is that would be an additional rate separate from our existing trash rates, so it would be negotiated. So it is definitely on our plans to add organics and green waste to those customers that need to have it.
And does Waste Management, in your discussions with them so far, have a plan for how to handle that material?
Yes. And we're also working with Yolo County as well. They're bringing out some ideas about how to handle organics from both the residential and commercial sector.
I will say, I think the inclusion of food waste for residential is amazing.
Yeah.
Because I find myself wishing that I had something like that for where I currently live. So 2 thumbs up to that. Has there been any consideration in this contract of including a statement that the hauler must automatically update their contract to address new statewide requirements?
Yeah, I mean, we usually put those types of terms in the contract, and they usually push back on it, because if there's a significant change in either state or federal law that really requires them to change their operations, you can't expect them to do that at no cost. And usually what that is, it's a contract opener. And we'll put, parameters around that. A change in law that doesn't affect their operation or doesn't increase their costs, they really shouldn't be allowed to come back for a cost increase. But for example, contracts that are in place now that are going to run for the next 10 years, and with 1826, that's a pretty significant change in law that's going to change their cost base. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, why was it that the city froze any rate increases for 2011-12 and 2012-13?
At the time of our 5-year rate study, so the city had to do a Prop 218 process for both, well, not both, well, water, sewer, and refuse rates. At the time, water and sewer rates were in a position where they required additional increases, so in order to lessen the burden on our customers, we decided to freeze refuse rates, given the fact that we did have a carryover balance that we could use to make up the difference. So it was a policy decision to try to keep rates reasonable for our customers in the other areas.
So the report mentioned that with AB 1594 coming into full implementation in 2020, that the desire is to include contract conditions to make sure that the city is still meeting their 50% diversion mandate under AB 939. Has there been any indication about how much green waste we're actually sending to landfills currently, and whether or not we're close to that threshold? Because I certainly think it's
Yeah.
appropriate to consider. I just,
Right.
out of all of the major laws that are coming through that require large changes for the city, I'm trying to get a sense for how significant that change is going to be as well.
we'll have to take a look and respond back to you on that one. And because AB 1594 is law,
Mhm.
we would look at that as a change in law going forward. So that has to be covered as part of any new contract going forward, is a current condition in the current program that has to be addressed.
One comment, I guess, for the commissioners to ask is that, in the presentation, there was the question of if we embark on this hybrid system of first renegotiating with Waste Management and then extending the contract to other options. If there's a issue of perceived or not conflict of interest, but providing too much favor to Waste Management and redoing the contract. I just wanted to see if there were any comments about that, about whether or not we have any concerns about starting with Waste Management and then seeing how that process goes.
No.
Okay.
I think it's actually a good idea to take the hybrid approach.
Were there surveys done as far as, I mean, it sounds like everyone's really happy with Waste Management. There was, as a current provider for the city?
We have done surveys in the past. I'm trying to think of the last time we did waste management stuff. We have done surveys in the past. I mean, generally, I have a pretty good feel for our customer satisfaction, because I tend to hear the complaints if there are some, so.
You get to know about them.
I mean, I can't speak to numbers, but generally speaking, I think the majority of our customers are satisfied with the services. But like Richard mentioned, we are lacking some of the things that folks would really like to have. You know, the curbside collection of bulky waste is a big deal, hazardous waste, things of that nature. So I think that the option that we're proposing tonight will provide us with some additional services that I think that would increase customer satisfaction with what they have now.
Do you have a sense for how much it would cost to produce the RFP?
Yes, we do.
I mean, if you go through an RFP process, not just the RFP.
Or, I'm sorry, just the preparation.
Oh, you're $15,000 approximately to actually just the RFP document to get that out.
And how, at what point do you ask for the extension on the contract? Do you basically, once negotiations don't work with Waste Management, do you then set an extension at that point?
Well,
Just to give yourself a buffer?
Your current contract allows either party to ask for an extension, but it has to be mutually acceptable.
Okay.
So I think what we would suggest is if you are going to do the hybrid approach, you try to get a 3 to 6 months extension as a precondition of negotiations to give yourselves the room.
Sure.
So you just don't put yourself in the corner. And obviously, if it doesn't go and you just stop at that point and start the RFP process, if on the other hand, negotiations are successful and city council, adopts the new agreement, then that extension would actually go away, and it's just the start date of new services.
Okay.
Are there any other comments or questions about the presentation? Do we, as commissioners, recommend the hybrid approach moving forward as a recommendation to city council based on the presentation? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so that brings us to our general administration portion of the meeting regarding the calendar and reports from city staff.
The only thing I have for the calendar is their next meeting is scheduled for December 14th. And also just to put it on the record that the commission did receive the 2015 strategic plan. That should have been in front of you. That's the executive summary and also the bookmark.
Are there any major changes pertaining to the jurisdiction of this commission in the new strategic plan?
Not that I'm aware of, but I can look into that and provide an answer for you.
Okay.
But I haven't been told anything, so.
Okay, thanks. Okay, are there any future agenda item requests by members of the commission? Okay, with that, if there are no other action items, this meeting stands in adjournment. Thank you. Thanks. maybe we will meet again in
At
December.
some point.
Well, you certainly know about this subject area more than